Welcome to the Rant Live. Welcome to the Rant Live, because we are actually a live webcast that we convert to a podcast because we are down with technology.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah. These newfangled things that we can do. It's crazy.
We're so fancy. Yeah, we're kind of like the blog version of, you know, how like the Cubs and MLB use analytics. We are the blog version of kind of a analytically laden Major League Baseball organization.
So are you going to try to propose to me like a really bad new way to handle arbitration and service time? Is that what we're saying? Or
no, just give it some time. There's plenty of bad. We've got lots of bad to cover today.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah.
Woo.
No, actually, I mean, you know, as I've been watching the Cubs over the past few days, the quality of baseball is considerably better than it had been for quite a while there. And so that's good to see. I mean, you know, there's still kind of pieces that are completely just broken, but you know, I think there's a lot of reason for optimism, I think, as we go forward. I mean, the thing is that you've got guys like Ortega, Schwindel, and Patrick Wisdom who are all playing real well, and they're all like 29 years old. And so I'd feel a lot better if these guys were like 23 years old, like Alcantara. Well, Alcantara is actually a little older too. How old is he?
He's like 54, I think.
Yeah, he's a senior. Yeah. And so I think when you look at the pieces that are in place, I mean, Frank Schwindel is lighting it up, man. He's what is his WAR in the last 30 days is 1, which is great. That's 28th in Major League Baseball. Patrick Wisdom has a 2.3 WAR, which is the same as Javier Baez, by the way, which we'll get to later.
Well, and Wisdom leads all NL rookies in homers, and he's like 5th, I think, in outs above average for third baseman. And he's only been playing since the end of May. It's like May 25th. We're only talking about 3 months. You know what I mean?
And he's right on
almost 2 months.
Right on the verge of breaking Chris Bryant's record for number of home runs by a rookie in their rookie season for the Cubs.
Yeah, and so he's tied. He's tied with Billy Williams right now. I mean, he's passed Ron Santo and all these other guys. I think because Bryant's record is 26, and I think yep. Billy Williams is 25. If I'm not mistaken.
So I think he has 25 right now, right?
Yeah, he's tied. He's one behind Bryant, and
yeah.
and it's a little bit right. Like it's you know, I look at that two different ways too. You look at it on one hand, you're like, yeah, but he's 29 years old. But it's like, well, okay, but that's the same thing. Like not everybody develops the same way. Now, I will grant that like at 29, you should be physically more mature and just mentally, like emotionally in a different place than any of those things. And
you would hope so.
You know, you've spent a lot more. You have a lot more overall baseball experience. And it is kind of wild though, because the dude has actually hit really well in the minors. Like he's raked in the minors and hit a bunch of bombs. It's not like he came out of nowhere. But it's still it's kind of funny to be like, oh, these guys are rookies, you know, based on their experience in terms of Major League Baseball. But you know, they're a little bit. It's not often that you trade away a bunch of veterans and you actually get older, which the Cubs did, right? Like as a team, they got older because you got Ortega's Ortega's already 30. Schwindel's 29. He'll be 30 come June. And I don't know what Wisdom's birthday is, but he's, you know, nearing 30. So it's just kind of, that part's kind of funny to see. It's like the Cubs and the Bears are both dueling to see. Like the Bears are average like 27 years of age, which I saw the other day, which is kind of funny. But you think about kind of rebuilding and going through that generally, you think of a team getting much younger and just being totally inexperienced and not knowing what they're doing. And the Cubs have some of those guys, but they've got a whole lot on the other side of the spectrum as well.
Well, and the funny thing about the Cubs since the trade deadline is, I mean, offensively, I have to look at the number of runs that they've put up per game.
Wisdom just turned 30, didn't he? Yeah. Sorry. Kyle pointed out in the comments.
Okay.
Sorry.
But yeah, I mean, offensively, the Cubs haven't really fallen off that much. They may actually be better offensively. I haven't looked at that, but I think where they've really dropped off is in their pitching. And
yeah.
That's kind of crazy to think about, really. I mean, so, you know, obviously Yu Darvish wasn't part of the equation at the start of the season anyways. It really was their bullpen. And I guess maybe that's what was kind of keeping them afloat just generally, to the extent that you want to, that you actually agree the Cubs were afloat prior to the trade deadline.
They were floating like
sinking.
that, like a turd that you can't flush is really what they were They were afloat in that sense. But anyway.
But so I mean, I guess they traded away some key bullpen pieces into Parra, Chafin, and the closer. What's his name?
Craig
that guy
Kimbrell,
who's been,
I think, is the man you're thinking of.
Imploding for the White Sox.
Yee.
That's gone well. But
Cubs won the trade.
The Cubs won that trade. But this is really kind of like to me a peek into like the offensive guys that they have going right now aren't really doing much worse than the way the Cubs were playing prior to the trade deadline, the month or so up to the trade deadline. So it's very conceivable to think that even with Chris Bryant, Javi Baez, and Anthony Rizzo on the team still, they could still be about where they are right now in terms of the record.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and those guys were certainly part of that 11-game losing streak. I think that the shakeup of all those things, these people, because what we saw for a lot of that was like Ortega was hot for a while, Schwindel's been hot mostly the whole time here. Wisdom has kind of gone hot cold, but he's doing really well lately, and he's always hot because he's a very fine looking gentleman. But it's the other pieces around there that haven't, like Ian Happ is flat out hot cold, right? He went 1 for 4 and got his average up to 200. Finally, he has been hitting pretty well lately. I think the issue is that, again, and finally they got rid of Jake Arrieta, but I mean Kyle Hendricks has been kind of dog shit the last couple of games. I hate to say that about him, but it's wild. Like I keep looking at it, like this guy. I don't know if anybody's who is it? Urias has passed him at all, but like Hendricks was leading the majors in wins for a crappy team. I think you sit there and you think like, but he pitched like ass early on. Remember how he's giving up 15 home runs every game? And then we're seeing kind of a recurrence of that, like Zach Davies. You never know what you're going to get outing to outing with that dude. Thankfully, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit more, but Justin Steele kind of bounced back, changed some things up. Didn't really look good for his first 2 starts. Keegan Thompson, starting tonight, has looked pretty bad. His first 2 starts, not missing any bats. Adbert Alzolay had been really struggling for a while, and it very much looked like kind of the innings load had taken its toll on him. Now, he looked great last night in relief. He just looked like a different pitcher, and he was a different pitcher because he was leaning on the 4-seam a lot more after, I think, kind of getting a little bit too happy with his new toys, kind of playing with those a little bit too much, the sinker and the slider, and not really mixing things properly. So their overall pitching, though, you just got so many young guys who not only are they trying to find their way, and I mean, some older guys too, but by and large, an entirely new pitching staff that not only are those individuals trying to find their way within the game, but then David Ross is sitting there like, I don't know what the hell to do with these guys. We got to figure these guys out, and how do they work with one another, and who do I use where, and what are these guys? And so we only just now saw Rowan Wick come back, right? He's only been back for a couple weeks now. Cody Hoyer is starting to figure some things out, and they're working with him again, tweaking his fastball. And he only throws a 2-seamer, which is wild to me. He does not throw a 4-seam fastball, which for the life of me, I can't wrap my head around. But they've made some tweaks there, and they're going to try to incorporate that. So, it's this weird mix. You just have this team that's in flux that is inconsistent in a different kind of way that we saw the offense and the team be inconsistent in the past. And I think and maybe that's my perception, because I can't be as frustrated with this team because I know they're not supposed to be any good. So I don't care if they go up. But to your point, though, they did score 3 runs and get a shutout, but there were only 3 runs came on a Frank Schwindel homer. They had 3 hits in that 1 inning and then won the rest of the game. And so it's like there was that 1 home run was the only offense for either team the entire game.
But again, very reminiscent of what the pre-trade deadline Cubs were doing.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest with you, so I just looked at the first half stats. First half, they were batting .227, .305, .394. Second half, 235, 301, 405. I mean, it's almost identical. They're better in the second half, just by a little bit. And so that's the thing is that if you look just offensively at the team and you say, all right, hey, we were basically in the same position. The Cubs were basically in the same position in the first half with Anthony Rizzo, Chris Bryant, and Javier Baez, as they are now with Frank Schwindel, Rafael Ortega, Robinson Chirinos, and Patrick Wisdom. So, I mean, looking at it that way, the trades were a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it from again purely that pragmatic, and I think the issue is like where before again, and I kind of alluded to this, but the inconsistency was maddening before, where they could go hang 15 runs on somebody and then they'd score 1 or 0 and it'd go up or down. But they had a much higher ceiling before, whereas and they had maybe not a lower floor, but essentially what you've done is you've lowered the ceiling and you've also lowered the floor. So it's like before they had a 3-story house with a basement, or they didn't have a basement, they just had a 3-story house. Now they got a ranch with a basement, So it's like there's less fluctuation because they just aren't, they don't have as much talent flat out, but they do have some guys. And I again, I'm trying to say this the right way. I'm not saying the previous group of players did not care. That's not it at all. But those guys weren't worried about their jobs. And now you've got a bunch of dudes in Wisdom, in Schwindel, in Ortega, who have never gotten a legitimate shot before. And now they're getting that shot, and they're getting to be out there every day. And so, you do see a different kind of, whether it's joy. Like if you look at Frank Schwindel, he's always giving the camera a goofy grin or whatever. And you can just tell, like, they're just happy to be there. And we don't even know, like, it could be a Micah Hoffpower thing, and he's never any good again with Schwindel. Who knows? But at least there's that. And again, I want to qualify this by saying a lot of it is because there are no expectations for these guys. And if they win, cool. And if they lose, okay, whatever. We kind of expected that. They're one of the 10 worst teams in baseball. And probably would be worse than that if this had, kind of been the whole season. But but that's where it is. And I've reached the point of acceptance to where it's like, okay, I get that these guys are gone. And honestly, I want to see them all succeed elsewhere, but it is hilarious. Like the drama that Javi is involved in out in New York immediately. And the fact that, like, everybody, all these people from New York, all of a sudden are like, oh my God, he strikes out so much and he doesn't walk very much. It's like, yeah, no shit. He's been doing that for the last 8 years.
There are many websites you can go to actually see these stats.
The guy was in the MVP race, and he's been one of the most popular players in Major League Baseball. He's been on the cover of video games. Like, it's not like he's just some like minor role playing guy. Like, normally you can look those stats up. Like, I could find those things out pretty easily. You know what I mean? So I get it that they maybe don't pay attention to it, but even the media is like, oh, but it's every day with this. Every day. It's a whole new, I think it's funny to see. And this is what I wrote about, though, is that at least in Chicago, like, he had the built-in credibility. Like, you knew that you would get the bust with the boom on occasion, or frequently. And it
was expected.
You knew that works. But now, like, the narrative literally changes on a daily basis, and sometimes within hours, on Javi, to where he's like, the worst thing that's ever happened in New York, now he's the greatest.
Yeah, I think some of that is just because New York fans are just so upset at how bad the Mets have been doing lately, is they need to take it out on somebody. And so whoever that is, they don't really care. And where Javier Baez makes it easy by putting thumbs down to the New York fans, which good for him for doing that, by the way. And then coming back the next day and scoring from first on a single to walk it off, which was great. I posted that on our Cubs Insider Twitter page just to show everybody what we talk about when we talk about Javier Baez being El Mago. Listen, he's not a perfect player. He's got a 2.3 WAR, which is actually good. He's going to be available at a discount. There's just no doubt about it, unless he just goes on a massive tear here starting now and gets the Mets to the playoffs and continues that tear into the playoffs. If that doesn't happen, he's going to be at a discount. they were talking about, who knows if this is true, right? I think he had been offered, the word was $180 million. Was it for how many years?
I never saw the number of years. I just saw the total. I
180.
saw that he had turned down 180. My assumption is that it was at least 7 years, if not
like
8.
20, that's $26 million a year. Who knows what kind of incentives were there? But at the end of the day, he's not going to get anywhere near that. He is not going to get anywhere near that. So right now, 2.3 WAR gets you probably about 16 million, right? A year.
Yeah, I mean, and it might be one of those bounce back type things that he's got to take. I've seen some people talk about a year at 15 million or something like that. Now, does New York give him well, they can't do a qualifying offer because he doesn't have he's not there for the year. So, I mean, does he look for a pillow deal that has some, kind of like something that Castellanos signed where he's got options after each of the first 2 years of the deal, right? Because he actually opted back in. I was kind of surprised that the Castellanos opted back in to his deal with the Reds for this year, but he can opt out again after this year. But I can't, and maybe there's some different things to it. Like maybe that still fuels him because I know we know Javi thrives off of the crowds, and that's a big thing. So like maybe even some of the negativity is a good, like this sounds odd, but there's, I mean, I look at, so I was a big Reggie Miller fan back in the day when he played, and his autobiography was titled "I Love Being the Enemy." And so that's a dude who would probably play better. Like he probably would have loved playing for the Knicks because then all those people would have been pissed off. And I mean, they would have loved him, but then they'd still be yelling at him. But some guys like that thrive with people like kind of yelling at them and getting in their face and forcing them to. So I don't know. He might just look at it differently. But for me, like watching the Mets fans absolutely melt down over this on a daily basis, I could, if I did not have enough money to buy food, it would provide sustenance to me. I could survive off of their absolute bitching and moaning over this for probably a week or two without actual food. I think I could go that long. And I could drinking their tears and eating their sorrow would sustain me for a good amount of time. And I love it. It's just so funny because I'm like, this is what you signed up for. And I will go back on it, and I will go back to what I said for at least 2 weeks prior to the deadline. You can go back and look at the back catalog, right? How many times did I say it would be stupid for the Mets to go big and trade? And at the time, Chris Bryant was in the conversation too. I said it would be really stupid for them to go big and trade for Javi or Bryant or both when you had Francisco Lindor hurt and we had Jacob deGrom out. It would be really dumb because now you're going to give up prospects. You're going to get these dudes. You're still going to miss the playoffs because you don't have your best players. And now you're trading people away for a dude who's going to be gone at the end of the season. And I love that they still did it. And I love that they are failing and they're going to miss the playoffs and they're going to probably lose these guys and then be stuck with everything. I look at it. It is the Metsiest thing. They got their GM picking up a DUI after a party at the owner's house that they knew about. And the dude's driving drunk because the Mets drive you to drink. And I don't mean to make light of it because that's a horrible thing. But it's just this organization and this is the GM who's only the GM because they hired Jared Porter, who had been perving some woman and giving her senator dick pics, the former Cubs assistant GM, right? If people remember that, that was at the start of the season. We were like, oh, why didn't the Cubs get Jared Porter? And we're like, oh, that's probably why. And the Mets hired him and had to fire him immediately. Now their new GM is drunk driving. I don't know if the organization is incapable of vetting and hiring people, if it's just such a culture of dysfunction that it brings these things out, or if those people attract other people. I can't believe it, man. Everything that can go wrong for that team does, but they are a part of it. They're absolutely fueling that and allowing it, and it's amazing to me.
It is pretty incredible. And then the Mets are 5 games back. The NL East is just not a strong division at the end of the day.
It's the N least.
The N least, the least is Yeah, I mean, Atlanta's in first, but they're only 8 games over 500. I guess they were smart for making that trade for Jock Peterson. I have no idea what he's done since he's been there, nor
He
do I
bleached his
care.
hair. That's all
There
I
you
know.
go. It doesn't really matter what anybody does. I mean, I think the Dodgers have overcome the Giants, which is shocking. The Dodgers are just on fire. Goodness, they are. I mean, the Dodgers are. I mean, between San Francisco, the Dodgers, and while I hate putting Milwaukee in there, I think they deserve to be in the conversation just because they're pitching so good. Oh man, those are 3 teams that any one of them, and the American League is kind of the same, really. I mean, if you start looking, the White Sox have really kind of come down off their high, even though they do still have a 10-game lead in the AL Central. The AL Central. That did not work. And Houston, 5 games up over Oakland again, but they're 586, which is pretty good. The Yankees have just been on a tear lately, and Tampa. I mean,
yeah, like the Yankees are on a
unreal.
tear, and Tampa is still just 7 games up in the division because they're 9-1 in their last 10. I mean, the Yankees won like 12 in a row or something a while. Like they just went on a couple to overtake Boston. But then Boston's
the Red Sox have fallen in their faces.
Yeah, but
they might not even make the wild card.
There's your Kyle Schwarber going. Although the Red Sox are they're still 2 games up on Oakland. I'm looking at it now. I mean, and it obviously depends because Oakland's only 3-7 in their last 10, and so that's kind of what's keeping them there. But I mean, Seattle's got a shot at that. But now you've got again you've got 3 teams out of the AL East all in playoff contention. And right now, if the season ended today, you'd have Boston and New York both in the playoffs. And then similarly, right now, San Diego is only half a game behind Cincinnati. But what's funny, right? So Cincinnati is in the second wild card position. San Diego is a half game behind. But how far, if you're already looking at it, then great, go ahead. But if you're not, how far is San Francisco ahead of Cincinnati in terms of the first and second wild card spot?
I am looking at it. 13 games.
Yeah, 13 games. So think about that. Like that's how much better and they're only right. So it's only a half game that separates the Dodgers and San Francisco. So they could, and I think they play each other this weekend, right? 3-game set, I believe, starting tomorrow.
And they probably don't they almost always end the season like playing like 6 games against each other or something. Just
yeah, I mean, because you have all the divisional stuff down the stretch in September. So like Milwaukee and San Francisco are playing each other now, and then San Francisco and LA. So I mean, that could still change places, but that's how far and away those teams are ahead of the rest because you've got San Francisco's a half game out of the lead in the division, and they're 13 games up on the second place in the wild card. And then there's San Diego. So, I mean, San Francisco is 13 and a half games up on San Diego right now. Like that is, and with everything they've been doing, I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible.
Well, and I'm looking at the Dodgers schedule, and surprisingly enough, this series starting tomorrow against the Giants is the last time this season they play the Giants. They play the Cardinals, the Padres, the D-backs, the Reds, the Rockies, the D-backs again, and then they end the season against the Padres. I guess they're trying to make the Dodgers and the Padres be rivals or something like that, but that's probably wasn't a very good plan. And I don't know what is the Giants? What's theirs? That seems like a pretty easy schedule coming down the stretch for the Dodgers.
Yeah, I mean, I would, and that's what I mean, it's like one really at this point with those teams, it's only a matter of seeding. You know what I mean? Like however they finish that out. And I think where it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Whether you're going to be a wild card or not, right?
Right. And then, but what you look at though is that second wild card spot. So it's, the Reds hold it right now, but San Diego's only a half game out. Philly's only 2.5 games out. St. Louis is only 2.5 games out. Right. There's a lot of things that could happen with the Central to where, again, you could have no Central teams outside of the division winner. You could have, you could really only have one or none. But Philly could sneak in there. And then all of a sudden you've got the again, the end least we were talking about could come back. Although I really think unless San Diego continues to suck, and they've been pretty bad lately, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see them catch a little bit of a hot streak and pass the Reds here late and capture that second spot. Because
but here's the problem with San Diego. they play. What did I say? They played the Dodgers twice, and they play the Giants twice. They play 7 games still against the Giants.
That's going to be tough.
This month in September, they're done. I mean, I just don't see how they're going to. That's 7 games against the Giants, and then let me look to see how many games they play against the Dodgers real quick. But that does not it does not bode well,
especially after they traded for like 15 pitchers, and then
oh my god, 7 games against the Giants and 6 against the Dodgers. 13 games in September against the Giants and the Dodgers.
They better get real hot then.
They better, and that's just so you can go ahead and say adios to them. So we'll see what happens. It should be interesting, I think, coming down the stretch, though. It's not fun, but it's at least we're not frustrated. And I just feel like, as Cubs fans, the past 4 years, basically since after 2016, we have had frustration in outside of 2017, because 2017 the Cubs were good and they went to the NLCS. But 18, 19, 20, those 3 years have been completely frustrating in September. They've played awful in September, and what few games they've played in October. So it's nice at least knowing that we can kind of sit back, relax. Football season's coming up. I've got my fantasy draft right around the corner. It's like you can kind of refocus. It's fun watching these young guys kind of do their thing and try to figure out where the pieces fit into the future. My big question to you is Adbert Alzolay. So he's come back and he's pitched he pitched last night in a relief role, and he's looked really good doing it. Now, of course, he had a lot of rest, and so some time to get healthy and strong. Does he stay in a relief role, or
he will the rest of the year? They've already said that, so but I mean, I think what you're going to look at is there's a couple things at play. One is the money, and if you say, well, we can save money by having this guy on a rookie deal in the starting rotation, because that's going to save a bunch there, and the stuff plays. Now, I would initially when he was coming up, it was fastball, curveball, trying to develop the change. Now the fastball's still there, but until last night, that had taken a back seat. I mean, he's throwing the slider that was new last year, like 40% of the time. He's throwing the 2-seam that he developed last year, 20-some% of the time. So like 70% of his pitches were, and then he started throwing a cutter, 10 to 15%. So you're looking at, there were times when 80% of his pitches, maybe more in a given outing, would be pitches that he had only developed and added to his in-game repertoire less than a year ago, or roughly a year ago. And so, like I said, the cutter he only started throwing in June of this year, right? He might have messed with it before, but that's when he started feeling comfortable in games. But I think the issue, and like I said, there's a matter of wanting to play with all these new toys, when it's like, well, but you got that mid-90s fastball, and that's what we saw last night. He's throwing it harder than he's thrown at any point this season. Now, part of that's when you're in a relief role, and he did go 4 innings, and he was still throwing 96. Into that in the 9th inning, in his 4th inning of work. That was his hardest pitch, and it was like 96.2 or 3 or something like that. And he averaged like 95.3. And if he's doing that, that's decidedly different. And some of that's mentality. Some of it's that he had a couple weeks off there. It was almost 3 weeks, but he's got to be able to use that. And because when you look at it before, like the 4-seam was simply not working very well. And as a result, and you can see it at times when he would I feel like his issues come when and I don't want to equate this to a 12-year-old or 13-year-old, but when I go out there and I watch my son, I mean, you can see him sometimes and he'll start aiming a little bit too much. He gave up a big hit the other day, and then you could just watch, you could physically see in his body language, you could see him, and he just started backing off, and he was kind of erratic. And I feel like that's happened with Alzolay, though. And again, it's a different situation. He's not a young kid, but it looked as if he was either trying to aim, or sometimes he would kind of dial back that slider too much. And all of a sudden now it's getting tagged, and that was what was happening with him. And he just was not. So, but when he attacks those hitters, because that's what I saw last night, it was a guy who was not afraid to just bust him with a fastball and then come back with that slider and really get after him. And so if he can do that, if he can maintain that aggressiveness, the same kind of aggressiveness we see when he's coming out of the bullpen, if he can do that as a starter and do it for 5 or 6 innings, different story. Again, if he's going, he can't just abandon the curveball and the changeup completely, because if you're talking about him working longer and developing, and now all of a sudden you got 4-seam, 2-seam, slider, cutter, change, curve, that's legit repertoire. But he's got to be able to mix them properly and be confident to throw them when he needs to be able to execute. That's a starter. If not, you say, well, hey, dude, here's the deal. Go out and let it rip and be our piggyback guy or our main, long reliever. And he can throw 96 instead of 93, 94. Then you got to use. I think they're going to give him every possible chance until he proves that he can't, either that he is a starter or that he can't be a starter. They're going to let him prove it, and that's going to take into next year at the least. Yeah,
it's got to. I mean, if you look at who they've got on their pitching staff right now, I mean, Zach Davies is gone, right? He's awful. I'm not sure anyone will sign into a professional contract again. He's been terrible, career worst year, actually. And doesn't look like he's headed anywhere near improvement. And so the Cubs really are going to need some pitchers. I mean, Alec Mills has been solid for them. I think he's definitely in the rotation to start next year. Obviously, Hendricks isn't going anywhere unless they trade him. I'm not sure he's got much trade value at this point in time because he's kind of playing down to his contract. Where the Cubs initially, it felt like the Cubs got a real good deal there. And I think initially they did get a real good deal there, but I just don't think he's, kind of the top kind of number 1, number 2 starter guy. He needs, the Cubs need some power. Is that going to come from the minors? Maybe. I don't know. Probably not next year.
If Marquez is ever healthy.
Braylon Marquez. Yeah, Braylon Marquez. This guy's like the disappearing act. Still at the top of the Cubs projected prospects. Like number 2 on some lists. And but based on what, I have no idea because we haven't really seen him pitch for a year.
Because he's lefty and he could throw 102. I mean, that's honestly, like, he's never put it together consistently, other than a bit of a run between South Bend and Myrtle Beach, but like these prospect rankings more often than not aren't about like, oh, we think this guy will be the most consistently good. It's like, who's got the potential that if they hit on all these tools, they could be, and that's where Marquez gets all those, right? And that's part of the reason it took a while on Brennan Davis, was because they didn't know who this guy was, because he had never committed to baseball, because he played basketball. He was a high-level basketball player in high school. And then, second-round pick, and a lot of people are still sleeping on the guy. I'm like, shit, give me the dude who's going up there and playing up and just mashing home runs as soon as he jumps up to the next level, and who's hitting them on a bigger stage in the futures game. Like, I don't know, I look like at stuff like that, and I think you just look at the pure athleticism and think, with baseball being as highly specialized as it is, and with so many of these young kids these days just focusing on baseball from the time they're like literally 8-9 years old, and so by the time, some of these guys, by the time they hit the age of 18 or 19, I'm not saying there's no growth left, but it's not as if you've got this massive room for improvement. Like, they kind of are who they are, and they're gonna develop just physically as you mature. But I look at a dude like Brennan Davis, and I'm going, okay, you've only been focusing on baseball for 2 or 3 years now. And at 6'4", he's got a frame that he could add muscle to without losing speed and quickness. And he could play any of those 3 outfield positions. And, okay, even if you're not hitting 40 home runs a year, I'm pretty sure that dude's good for 25. And he can run around. I mean, to me, it's like Dexter Fowler with more pop is kind of where I'm thinking this guy could end up, and perhaps much better. So I don't know. I like that. I just like that consistency of, and you know what? That's pretty damn good to get a guy who comes up. If you spend 6 or 8 years in the organization at a Dexter Fowler level, and you make the money that Dexter Fowler ended up making, that's a pretty successful career to me.
Yeah.
I'll
Definitely.
take that from a second round pick. That's what you want.
Well, and so speaking of Brendan Davis, you would expect to see him in the majors playing with the Cubs next year. And something interesting that came to light within the last day or so is this MLB has proposed an age-based service time, which would change the kind of service time or eliminate the ability of a team or desire of the team to manipulate player service time like the Cubs did with Chris Bryant. And in that case, you would see Brendan Davis probably starting with the Cubs day one. If the service time rules stay the same the way they are right now, you might see him come up, however long, a month later, however long it takes to be able to manipulate their service time and get another year out of them. But either way, Brendan Davis is going to be playing at Wrigley Field next year, barring major injury, right?
I would think so. And again, I know people, it's funny. I want to go back on this too, because I love when people are like, the Cubs didn't manipulate Bryant's service time. Those are part of the rules. I'm like, no, those aren't two separate things, folks. The rules allow for manipulation. They did manipulate his service time. Saying they
manipulate doesn't mean break rules. Right. We just need to clarify that.
Right. Like, if I'm driving my car, I can be within the speed limit. I am manipulating the throttle by pushing my foot on the pedal. I am making that happen. Like, it wasn't a natural thing. Like, he did not need 11 days at AAA, right? Like, I think we can all agree on that. Like, it's still so funny to me that people act as if, and again, was it against the letter of the law? No, but it's clearly against the spirit. Like, they clearly manipulated that to get the extra year. But here's the thing, right? For those who maybe haven't seen it, is the proposal was that Major League Baseball would allocate, at least in the first year, and it would be tied to revenue moving forward, $1 billion across the league to arbitration eligible players. And then, that would be spread out. And it is supposed, at first blush, and here's how the owners do it, right? They're like, well, but ARB eligible players only got like $650 million this year. So, hey, that's a $350 million raise. And then what they would do is then free agency would be at age 29 and a half. So regardless, you hit 20, and the half is because if your birthday is on, they do the league year when you're it's based on July 1st is what is your age by July 1st, and that's the age. So you would have at least 1 year, quote unquote, in your 20s, right? Now, would suck for a guy with a July 2nd birth date, and then he's going to turn 30 in his first year of free agency. They're like, oh, they'll have at least 1 year in their 20s. With like, okay, but he's 29 and a half, right? Let's be honest here. That's not really in your 20s. But the thing is, that raise, so to speak, in the pool, first of all, it's still a salary cap, basically, because we're capping the pool. And then the thing with that is there's actually a few things going on here. One of them is that the ARB eligible player pool is going to increase because a lot of these guys will become free agents at 26, 27, 28 under the current rules, right? So now you've got a whole extra group of players that's in there. Probably some that are hitting it earlier because they're not manipulating them as much anymore. So now they're hitting it earlier. And consider a player like Juan Soto, or how about Fernando Tatis? When they debut at 20, those guys would have to play for a decade.
Yeah.
In order to earn their free agency. So you know what's going away? The monster $340 million extension that Tatis got, because the Padres are going, like, shit, why do we don't have to give you an extension. We've got you locked up for 10 years.
Yeah, it's a bad deal. I mean, but
it's good for the older
MLB
players.
Always does this. It's come up
for
with
the older players, because now more money shifts to them, because they're saying, oh shit, you're not paying a 22-year-old a monster contract anymore, and you've capped how much money you're paying to this whole group of players under the age of 30. So if I'm over the age of 30 or I've already hit free agency, fuck do I care? Yeah, man, give me more money. And who has the most voting power in the players union? I'm guessing that a lot of those reps are in that group where they could look out for their own. But anyway, I'm sorry, I stepped on
that. Just seems like a high age. I mean, yeah. I would think maybe 28 and a half would be more reasonable
at best. Yeah. Or you just cap it and you say, like, flat out, just it's 6 years. Like, get rid of the Super 2 thing and the or lower, right? Because right now it's whatever it is 11, whatever, how many days are in the league year, and it's 182 or whatever it is, and then so it's like 171 or something, 170, whatever it is that you need for a year of service time. Well, then lower that first year of service time, right? So, hey, you spend a week, or you get called up at all, you get a year of service. I mean, that's maybe a little bit too much, but at that point, then you say as a team, like, you've got to say, okay, so we're going to sit this guy for the entire year. Like, we're going to not let him play this entire, are we willing to do that and have him sit this entire season? And I would guess that a team would not be willing to do that, especially if they want to be competitive. And so you have to either eliminate that or lower that age, or just, again, say flat out 6 years of time, regardless. You don't get that extra year, right? Somehow, whatever it is. And from the time they come up, clock starts running. Once you call them up, even if you send them back down, clock keeps running. I'm sure that's what the players would prefer. And so, because at that point, though, if the guy, let's say it's Ian Happ, or it's somebody who kind of washes out a little bit, like, if you're that team, do you really want that extra control over a player who maybe was a phenom early, and then that stuff fades? Are you really concerned about that? But it would force teams to make better decisions with some of those guys instead of bouncing them up and down, and hey, we're going to let him figure it out here at the higher level. Jared Kelenic up there in Seattle, they kind of kept him down for a while, and I mean, some of these guys just got to figure it out, and sometimes that's better to struggle. I know sometimes that can be bad psychologically, to come up and just get your ass kicked every day, but for some guys it's going to make them stronger. And so it just depends on who those players are. But I looked through that, I just thought, this feels like, again, but hey, we're giving you $350 million more toward this player pool. It's like, yeah, but 29 and a half, dude. And I love this. Like, it would give them at least they would all hit free agency in their 20s. Like, no, dude, because what did we just talk about at the beginning of the show? How you can't really put much value on dudes who are 29 years old. Because guess what? The first year of that contract, they turn 30. Like, yeah, you hit free agency, but you're going to turn 30 6 months into it. Like, come on, man. That's but
yeah, it's just like, what do you do with guys like that? I mean, those are guys who, if they're on a team, chances are they're not the ones that are the reason the team is winning. You got to have younger players. You typically don't see a team full of 29-plus-year-old players going to the World Series and winning it.
Right. And how many, and I know but how many, if you sit there and you said all free agents will be 29 years old, like, or, at your first go round at free agency, you're all going to be 29 and a half, right? Ish in that neighborhood. You think those guys are getting the same kind of contracts as what they would if they were, and let's look at Jason Hayward, for example, who came up when he was 19 years old, and as a result was able to hit free agency at just 26.
And thank God for that, because look at what he's done the last couple of years.
Right. But that's a huge part of the reason he got the contract that he did, was because he was so much younger. Normally a free agent is going to be 27 or 28. And so you're looking at, you are still in your physical prime for a few years. He's got an extra year or two of that, and that's what got him that big. And he played really well that season and had a couple of very good years in there. But now all of a sudden, if you're Major League Baseball, if you're the union, you're going like, hold on. Yeah, you're allocating some more money down here to this lower level, but guess what? All those major contracts that would be going. Bryce Harper is another guy who was came up very young, was able to get it. And again, you're looking at Soto and Tatis, Vladdy, right, up in Toronto. That gets eliminated. Those guys aren't in line for that monster contract when they hit free agency, because now they're going to be 2 or 3 years older than they would be under other circumstances. So cool, that $350 million a year that you allocated to those players who are ARB eligible gets taken right out of those major contracts that are being signed by the guys once they would normally hit free agency. So it's not any more money. They're just shuffling stuff around and trying to make it look cooler, when in fact it would, to me, this would be incredibly detrimental to the players. And I can't imagine they would take it. But I don't know. We've seen them do dumb things before. Hopefully that's not the case here. But I have to imagine they laughed at the owners with that, and then the $180 million cap they tried to put on there too. So that was cool.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it's encouraging to see that there's actually some type of conversation happening before the I think it's December 1 deadline when the CBA expires. But at the end of the day, this is going to play out over several months, well beyond December 1st for sure. So the Cubs the Cubs have won 5 of 8, just FYI, people. And they play 4 against the Pirates in Wrigley, where they've been absolutely awful lately. Well, they've been awful everywhere, but and they've got a 10-game homestand, which is if it's not the longest of the season, it's definitely right up there. And so, 4 against Pirates, 3 against the Reds, day off, and then, which is weird, at home, and then back at it against Chris Bryant's San Francisco Giants. God, I want to punch myself in the head when I say that, but it is true. And so that should be interesting. I mean, this Cincinnati, I don't know. They're not really playing that well. Pittsburgh's terrible. So feels like the Cubs have got a little bit of momentum playing. As long as Zach Davies doesn't ever pitch again, the Cubs might be able to win half of these games.
I dig it. Let's do it. Just say, might as well get back far away from that 5 spot on the draft. Who knows?
Yeah.
Back into double.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I feels like they're going to win 50% of their games going forward. So that's my prediction. They don't play anyone really good except for the Giants and the Brewers the remainder of the season, unless you think the Cardinals are good. And then if you do, then why are you even listening to this show? Anyways, we've got to run. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and we'll circle back with you next week, hopefully with some good news as usual. Cool. So until then,
see ya.
See ya.